Thank you so much. I love this center in a day and age where I think, everything's God, everything's divine. I'm not hating on anything, but sometimes I feel like we live in a more and more plastic world. Like I have a screen. We all have these screens. It's like, well, what's in there? It's really great. We get all this information, but it's so thin, and it's and here, brick and wood, and I just love this place. It's so neat. And so to be able to exist in the 21st century with all this information and technology we have, and to do it within a place like this, it's the best of the old and it's the best of the new. So I love it. We're talking about. It's interesting. Speaking of divine paradox, and I think that what I find really interesting about getting into this myself is that Ernest Holmes, our founder, and I think the whole New Thought side of the street spiritually, is very much this idea of creativity, this idea of solving issues, of moving forward, of how do we live in this world? How do we solve the issues that come up for us? And so right now, just like any time, I'm not a really big believer. Some people say, "Oh my God, we are in the most whatever time ever." And I think that in my little bit of knowing history, I like history. I'm not an expert in it, but I like it. I think there's been a whole lot of times like this, and so I think that sometimes we need to mellow out a little bit, and just know that we're going to find our way through it. I'm not minimizing any of the issues that we're facing. But I think nowadays, like any time, we're asking ourselves a question: how do we kind of sort this out? How do we come up with solutions to issues, whether it's very much in our personal lives and in a small way, or some of the larger ones, or whatever? And this idea of using the paradox, and the definition of a paradox is a self-contradictory proposition that would investigate it or explain to prove to reveal a profound truth. And I think that what I found interesting was, in the midst of all this, doing my thing, because I spoke a couple of weeks ago at another center somewhere, and so the title was about the paradox, and so I kind of waded in on it then. And I've been doing a lot of reading about it this month, and it's really interesting. The name of somebody came up for me in my research, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Robert Rothenberg. And what's interesting is Dr. Rothenberg is, you think, well, if you think about thinking and ideas and creativity, and how do we experience the world, and how do we work with our consciousness, you would think that the doctor would be a PhD, but actually this doctor is an MD, which I found really interesting. And in reading about him, basically, he works in a field, everything physical, everything medical. Whenever any of us are dealing with a physical issue, a medical issue, a diagnosis, a condition, a challenge, whatever, that's pretty serious. It's hard to smile through that. It's hard to be very playful through that. We want to find the answers. We want to find, what direction can we go. And we just went through the whole COVID thing, and so there were all kinds of really, smart people coming up with ideas and vaccines and all that sort of thing, and protocols, and it was very serious stuff. But what's really interesting is that Dr. Rosenberg, he speaks of the paradox in terms of a way of opening up our examination of paradoxically derived creativity based on curiosity and playfulness. Based on curiosity or playfulness. So imagine, and I don't know what type of medicine he practices. It just dawned on me that I never figured that out. But imagine someone in oncology, cancer, and is in that world and trying to figure things out and trying to sort things out. And so so this individual, this man or woman, would be moving forward with curiosity and playfulness. That seems so interesting to me, like, wow. Like there's this space in us to create space, to not take it quite so seriously. Not that we don't care, not that we're not present, but imagine children, this archetype, we kind of have of children, turn them loose in the forest or the backyard, and with minimal objects and freedom, within safety, of course, but freedom. And watch them during an afternoon, and watch how they explore that piece of property, chasing butterflies, looking for bugs, turning sticks into swords, and climbing on trees, and first they're pirates, and then they're cowboys, and then they're Vikings, or whatever they are. They just allow their mind to go wherever. That idea of that childish quality in a person who has all this education, this MD, this education, to come into something in a way where we almost remove ourselves from all the rules, the ideas, the definitions, and we go into this place of curiosity. It reminds me of when you study the spiritual directions and the ways that we define different types of spirituality. All those ways that people have been trying to find God and spirit in their way forward. And one of those, in terms of anthropology, looks at cultures and says, okay, how are people moving into the spiritual realm? What is their device? What is their frame of mind? And we think of the shaman archetype again. And the shaman archetype, the word shaman comes to us from anthropology. It's some of our most ancient relatives, ancestors, our most ancient ancestors, and the way they approach spirit through the world around. Shamanism is very much based on exploring different depths of the world that we all live in, the universe. And what's interesting, when anthropologists put together this word shaman, they say, okay, what defines that? And as they look the world over, one of the things that is one of the most common aspects of the way that the shaman approach to spirituality, healing, living, making decisions, is that something they all had in common is that very often the shaman, the spiritual leader, would very often cover their eyes. And in some cultures, the coverings were incredibly ornate. They may be feathers and all kinds of different textiles and animal skins or whatever, shells, and cover the eyes. It's like a blindfold, basically. And the shaman would go into their work, and the whole idea is to move beyond the seen world to go into the unseen world. Let's think about that for a moment. In the seen world, we don't know what's going on. We can't figure it out. And so we use all of our definitions, we use all of our ideas in the seen world. Is it possible that the answer is in the unseen world? Like we like to use the word intuition, insight. It's interesting. Intuition, insight, looking in. So the shaman, whether it was someone in front of them with a physical condition, maybe it was a community problem, maybe it was a nature problem, maybe the shaman was just trying to get some information, so put the blindfold on to open up into a larger insight. Imagine the curiosity and the playful nature of that. Where am I going to go? Think of all the little kid games that we all played, where we blindfolded ourselves, to hit the pinata or to, blind man's bluff, or all those games we played, and to have everyone go in the room and freeze and stay there, and the kid with the blindfold would try and find everybody, right? And they would giggle and laugh and everything. It's playful, curious, where are they at? And we open up all of our senses. And so the shaman is to open up a way of going forward that they had never considered before. So I'm a very visual person, and whenever something comes to me, an idea, a concept, a theology, a definition, I think of it in terms of sort of like experiential. What's that like? What's that feel like? What's it look like? And so in getting into this whole world of the paradox, what comes up for me is is an experience I had a number of years ago in terms of trying to figure something out when it was not going to be present in the seen world, in a seen way. I'm using seen now more like a metaphor as opposed to literally. So, like a lot of people, as we grow up with our parents or a parent, and maybe there is a parent that we struggle with in terms of being able to really form an intimate connection at some level. In other words, there's some sort of don't quite connect, some sort of unavailability, emotional unavailability, or presence unavailability. And for me, it was my father. My father was a good, decent person. He was kind of quirky. You know, I'm a good, decent person. I'm pretty quirky, but our quirks were different. We weren't like Legos. We didn't snap together. He had his quirks, I had my quirks, and so we just didn't really connect. And as a kid, this was really kind of obvious. I was always a lot closer to my mom, and my dad was someone who, I was looking at him like, hey, how do I be a guy in the world? So I'm kind of looking at him, and I'm trying to figure him out, and not really getting it. And he's looking at me like, I'm supposed to make this kid a guy, and I can't really figure him out either, And so we began to go forward that way. But as you know, when we become adolescents, and all of a sudden we have hormones, and we have a lot of chemicals in our bodies, and all of a sudden we have an attitude, and we're looking for our authenticity. And so then that really kind of came between us. And I was, as a teenager, and I was a very aggressive, and not saying I fought a lot, but I could definitely tell you what was on my mind, and I could do it in a very assertive way. My dad wasn't quite like that. He'd say, you're too much, dial it down, Andy, you're too much. So time went on, and in our adult life, as I became an adult, and for some reason it was always just kind of a struggle. And so some years ago, I was in the process of making some very big changes in my life. My life had gone in a direction that was not the greatest direction, so I wanted to make some big changes. That's actually how I found this philosophy. This philosophy, in many ways, saved me. I know that sounds over the top, but it's true. And so one of the things I wanted to do is, my father was getting older and I was getting older. It occurred to me that I did not want him someday to move on to the next realm and not have some stuff worked out. I mean, I loved him. I knew he loved me, but so what's going on here? And my dad, I've always made my living working with people, and my dad was more of an engineering guy. He went from PG&E, he had a mathematical mind, he had a great linear mind. So we were kind of operating in two worlds, and so I thought, if this is going to happen, I really need to kind of instigate this, because my dad is not really in his skill set range, and that's okay. It's not a bad thing. Believe me, if you have a garbage disposal that needs fixing, he was the guy you wanted, not me. And so he was great in that. So I knew I wanted to fix this relationship, and so he was living in Arizona, and I would travel down there and see him once in a while. And my mom had passed away my mom never saw 50 years old. She passed away several decades ago. And so he had remarried and lived in Arizona, and I'd go down and visit him, and so I was just kind of trying to work with it. And so I decided to just really kind of, ask him about his life and show a lot of interest in him, and just, shut up and listen and just really be present for him. We made a lot of progress. And so, but it was still a work in progress. We still kind of had this thing. And then my dad moved into a heavy dementia phase, and so as time went by, he had a type of dementia that came once it started to roll. It really began to displace a lot of information in him. So I was kind of freaked out. And so I got a call from his wife one time, and I was planning a trip down there, and I knew that, he was struggling. And so his wife called and said, Andy, I just want to tell you before you come down here, I think you need to know this, that there's a very good chance you may not know who you are. So I just want to let you know that. in case you want to come or don't want to come or whatever. So no, I want to go down there. And I was just, I was going to go down for 3 or 4 days, and I thought, wow, so how do I, first of all, love him, I care about him, and I'm thinking about what he's going through, but then also my project, right? How do we connect? So I turned to someone who I had a lot of respect for, and I'm going to tell you a story, and I want to preface this by saying I'm sure that a lot of you in this room have dealt with family members and stuff, and I'm not saying that the approach I took is the right approach for you or anybody else. Someone gave me some advice, it worked out really well, and so I'm just going to kind of tell it from that perspective. So I don't mean to offend anybody. So I went to someone who I knew had some experience in this, someone I respected, someone from our philosophy, and I said, I said, what do I do? And she told me, she said, Andy, what I would do if I were you is I would go down there and I would go into his world, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Go into his world. I said, okay, what do you mean by that? I said, don't get into correcting, don't get into, reminding, don't get into, handling him about what he knows or doesn't know. Just go in his world. Just go in his world. Just say yes to his world. It's kind of like, I don't know how many of you are familiar with improv, like, in acting. They say improv is always say yes, right? So, okay, so you're going to have a shoe store, and you're going to be the customer. Yeah. Okay, so the customer comes in, hello, welcome to my shoe store, and can I help you? And the person comes in and says, yes, do you sell ice cream? And so yes, I do sell ice cream. It's behind the tennis shoes. You're in luck, so let's go over here. And what kind of ice cream would you like? Well, I would like something that matches the shoe I'll carry in. Yes, we can arrange that, right? And so you just keep going. Okay? And the whole idea of improv is to build, is to discover something, to take it into a whole new realm, right? And that's what she was saying. Just say yes. Whatever he does, just say yes. Just go with it. So I went down there, and I walked into the house, and his wife meets me at the door. He walks in. He was sitting on a couch, and he looks at me, and I could tell in his face. And it was kind of hard to see. I could tell in his face. It's like, well, who is this person? And I'm physically kind of bigger than my dad is. My dad was a thinner person, a little bit shorter, and so here I am, I'm kind of overbearing looking. Imagine meeting me for the first time in your house. You don't know who I am, right? And so I went in, and his wife said, yeah, Andy's here, and stuff. And so he didn't seem to connect much with the name. And so I sat on the couch kind of across from him, and we're talking. And somehow along the line, he was trying to figure out who I was, and it was hard because at one level there was a lot of question, but there was also a little bit of fear, like who is this person? And so he kind of came to his own conclusion that I'm some distant cousin of like my mom, who was passed away. So it kind of put me out there in the circle somewhere in Saturn, right? And I thought, that's pretty good. This is pretty generic, So someone maybe he doesn't really know too well. So he kind of made me that. So yes, I'm that person. And so I wanted to, in my relationship with my dad, what is it that we want when we want intimacy? You want to know them. You want to know their history. You want to know how they feel about you. You want to know how they feel about what you share together, right? And I was thinking to myself, how in the world is this going to be? But I just kept going. And so pretty soon, what I noticed was my dad, in trying to figure out who I was and what I was, would bring people up and ask me if I knew them. And so now I'm going to use the word no, but in a weird way I mean yes. And I hope you understand that, right? So I would say no, because I was saying yes to tell me. Does that make sense? I'm using no, but it's really yes. And so I said, no, tell me about that. I was with him for three or 4 days, and during the course of our time, besides having lunch, and he had a couple doctor's appointments and hanging out and stuff like that, he would get in these conversations, and he went through this endless, and sometimes he repeated it, right? Maybe he asked me about the same person an hour ago, but I still said, no, I don't know, tell me about that. And it was amazing because during this time, I began to, as you know, he kind of started out there, uncles, cousins out there, people, yeah, okay, you know, whatever. But the circle started coming in. So now we're starting to move in. Now we're moving into, you know, his brothers, his family, my grandfather, those kinds of things. And eventually into the family that was us, right? And I could almost predict it. It was interesting. He was coming in. So he asked me, my sister's name is Jeanette. He said, you ever meet my daughter, Jeanette? You know her? No, I don't know her. Tell me about her. And I began to uncover what he meant to her. Yeah, I don't know if what he said was true factually, but I do know he was speaking from his heart. What she meant to him. And I knew that they had a closer relationship. It was just, it was so sweet. It was so amazing, their relationship. Then he came through my mom. My mom's name was Evelyn. Did you ever meet my wife, Evelyn? No, I never did. Tell me about her. And I began to uncover what the depths of their relationship and some of their earliest courting and some of the struggles they had, and you know, through his and how he you know, felt like he let her down sometimes, but he knew she loved him, and you know, all just incredible things. It was just so amazing. And so eventually, he said, "Did you ever meet my son Andy?" I said, "No, I never did. Tell me about it." And he began to tell me about our relationship from his perspective. And this was the liberating part, because I think that as human beings, we tend to, you know, what are we talking about? We're talking about paradox. We're talking about, okay, let's be the shaman. Let's put the blinder on. Let's start looking at this at something differently, right? So I had my own perspective, and so I was like blaming myself, and I'm not enough, and I'm not good enough, and all that stuff. For years, I did that stuff, right? And I found out that he talked about how he loved me so much but could never really understand me, and then all the ways he felt like he hadn't been enough for me. For Andy, because I didn't blow my cover. Wow. The greatest quantum leaps that I made in our relationship was when he did not know who I was. So how does this fit a paradox? I am a son, he is a father. One day I walked into a house, I was no longer the son, he was no longer the father. So we would say, well, that doesn't make sense. You're not going to figure out anything like that. Yeah, you are. Oh my God. If we can just put it away. You know? The interesting thing about things like playing with things like paradoxes and stuff like that in terms of finding solutions, healing, and things like that, is that, you know, we all know what we think, right? We know that, you know, I don't like that color, I do like today, my favorite flower is a rose, you know, all that stuff. We know what we think, right? Do we know how we think? Oh, that's tough. I've worked with people for a long time. I work in a field right now of addiction. In the recovery of addiction, one of the things you have to take on if you have that issue is you have to start learning how you think. Not what you think, but how. That's critical. And I'm telling you, those conversations of investigating how we think, oh my God, that is really hard to start to sort out. That's why something like the paradox, and see what this doctor is saying, the gentleman I was talking about, is, you know what? I need to be able to go into a disease, a challenge, and I need to be able to put everything I put aside and just be a kid. Just be curious. Just be playful. What am I going to find? Right? So I was thinking about my relationship with my dad, and I was thinking about this story. And one of my favorite writers that I lean on, he's really heavy into the men's spiritual movement. His name is John Lee. And I was looking at one of his pieces the other day. He kind of sets up these pieces kind of paints a picture and kind of takes you into an idea. And this is the idea of what John Lee is taking on is the idea of the childlike, curious, let's go play approach to life. And John Lee says, it's them again, that small tousle-haired kid appearing at my morning window. I raise the window and look into their clear eyes as they yell, can you come out and play? And I say, yes. I yell that back to them. Once upon a time, I went to Arizona, and a kid said, can you come out and play? And my job was to say yes. Ernest Holmes said, I'm going to end with this. Ernest Holmes said, who is our founder, strive toward a perfect vision, cutting through all appearances, feeling a deeper union with life, a greater sense of spirit, the seen and the unseen within all experiences. We cannot account for the seen without having faith in the unseen. What is the faith? Let's go play. Let's try to look at something in a different way. Thank you guys so much. It's great to be here.